Chapter 18. I woke up, my head aching. My eyelids felt heavy as I tried to grasp onto the soft sound of crackling near me. My body was refusing to move from its place, and I didn't want to open my eyes. The air around me was warm, but at the same time cold. The wind was whistling against something outside, and I could hear something moving near me, and I felt my muscles tense up naturally. I could feel my heart pound against my chest, and I began fearing for the worst. As the shuffling of feet against a hard surface began to get closer, I could feel my body panicking, but it wouldn't move. My body felt heavy, and it was hard to even breathe, and suddenly past reminders of my illness pushed me into overdrive. My eyes shot open as the world spun rapidly around me. Something wet lay on my head, and my mind began attuning to my surroundings. It was dark and damp, but warm. The shuffling I had heard previously stopped, and I felt something watching me closely. My head was in massive amounts of pain, and I could barely move my fingers. I managed to turn my head to where the sun came from to see a black silhouette looking down on me. I felt unusually small, weak. Like I had been staring down a lion. Eventually the figure sat down, his gaze softening from the previous hard glare. He brushed his hand over my arm, making me feel its odd leathery texture. Once my breathing seemed to relax, and I was no longer panicking, the figure moved his hand closer to my face. He covered my eyes with his hand, and my eyes slowly closed naturally. After a short while, I heard a raspy, deep voice ring out in the emptiness. "Just go to sleep," he said, and as if on command, my body drifted into that darkness again. Time skip. When I woke up again, my limbs were no longer heavy, and my eyelids opened on their own. I was in a different place than I remember being in last. The atmosphere was much different, warm and inviting almost, but the place wasn't what I wanted to see. It was a hospital room. I sat up and looked around slowly, my mind not wanting to accept where I was. Where was the man I saw? What about Jeff? My thoughts were interrupted by the opening of the hospital room door. A doctor, followed by my parents, entered the room. When my mom saw me, she burst into tears. She ran to my side, tears running down her face. When she reached my side, she hugged me tightly, throwing me into a coughing fit. When she finally let go, she could barely form a sentence. My dad stood next to my mom, a sad smile on his face. I was going to open my mouth when the doctor rudely interrupted me. "So, Tara, I'm sure you're wondering what happened, but it may increase your stress, so it's your decision," he said, a concerned look on my face. After a while, I nodded my head slowly. I had to know what happened. "Well, we suspect that you were kidnapped by this killer once again. Police went looking for you, and after several weeks we found you in a cave. You had a mild concussion, and your body was constantly pushing out adrenaline due to some untreated injuries. However, they got you back in time to be saved. You are a very lucky young lady," he finished. My mind went blank as I stared at the wall. I don't feel lucky, though. I slowly opened my mouth to ask something that I'm sure everyone asks at some point. How long was I out? "About 2 months," he answered, his voice blank. I nodded and he cleared his throat. Now, I have to do some things. I'll come back in a bit to check your vitals and such, he said, leaving the room soon after. The room felt quiet, and the only sounds were the clock and heart monitor. I stared at the wall, many questions running through my head. Plus, this doesn't feel right. Like I'm not supposed to be here. My mind flashes back to memories of what seemed not too long ago. After I thought about it, I concluded that the man was probably deaf. But I had one question. Why would he take care of me? He already hates me as much as it is. So, why? My thoughts are quickly interrupted by my parents, who just now stopped crying and sobbing. Tara, honey, are you alright? I know that was a lot to take in. My mom asked, looking at me, her cheeks stained with her tears. I tried to pull the best smile I could, but I'm pretty sure it didn't work very well. I'm fine, Mom. I mean, from what I remember, being in a hospital bed kind of surprised me. I'm just trying to take it all in, I said, trying to make myself sound somewhat happy. My mom gave me her award-winning smile, and my father patted me on the shoulder. We're glad that you're okay, Tara. Your mom would have been a total wreck if she found out you were gone for good, he said, putting on a bright and cheery smile. I shook my head and laughed softly. Well, I'm not gone for good, Dad. I'm perfectly fine, I said, smiling at my mom, who shook her head at me and leaned back in the chair she had sat in. You're not perfectly fine, sweetheart, but being alive is close enough for me, she said, her face slowly losing its shine. I frowned at her, and she perked up. What matters is that you're here. My dad sat next to me, his smile radiating happiness. We talked, and they got me caught up on the news lately. Apparently there haven't been any kills anywhere in the country since I went missing. It struck me with curiosity, but I kept my mouth shut as they talked about it. They thought that maybe that bullet my dad shot did enough damage to stop him. But in my mind, I wasn't sure that the bullet was the cause. I knew it was something else, but I don't have a clue as to what. When the doctor came back, he did a checkup on me. He said I was healing at a good, healthy rate, and I might get to leave soon. But that depends on a lot of factors. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. So I'll probably be staying for a good month or so. I wasn't too fond of it, but it's not like I can do anything else serious about it. I mean, I can plead, but what would that get me? But that would get me nowhere fast. I knew I just had to wait. Time skip. Later that night, when the nurses checked on me, they told my parents visiting hours were over, and they had to leave. I told them goodbye and got a quick squeeze from my mom. When they left, the nurses insisted I get some rest and turn off the lights. Now, I'm laying here with my eyes closed, listening to the soft sound of beeping in the room. I soon felt the room get really cold and opened my eyes. I looked and saw the window next to my bed opened, and someone I knew well standing there. His clothes made of simple white hoodie, black pants, and tennis shoes. His features unmistakable, black lined eyes and a huge carved smile. He looked at me, a blank look on his face, knife in hand, dripping in someone's blood. I smiled slightly as I looked at him. Nice to see you again, Jeff. Chapter 19. I looked at Jeff, the moonlight barely providing enough light to see his appearance. He was covered in blood. Some innocent person's blood. It was disgusting, and thanks to the moonlight, I could see the crazed look in his eyes. The window let in the cold air, sending chills down my already frozen spine, and the longer I looked at him, the more I felt my life was endangering. After a while of staring each other down, he slowly began approaching me, but I wasn't scared. I wasn't shaking. I seemed fine, even with my heart pounding in my chest. He moved slightly closer to me, and my mind was slowly entering panic. I knew what was going to happen if I stayed still, but that didn't make me move. I just watched him, the smile spreading across his face, the crazed look in his eyes. I knew he was ready to draw blood, but I didn't know what to do to keep it from happening. I looked at him, breathing slowly to try and slow my heartbeat. He looked down at me and brought his knife to his lips, slowly licking off the blood. My mind went blank with terror as he began to slide the knife next to my neck. My heartbeat skyrocketed, and I did something I would normally regret. I grabbed his hand. His face seemed to light up with anger as I sat up and slowly slid the knife out of his hand. He was about to reach for it when I put it on the opposite bedside table. He looked at me, and I could see that if I got his hands on that knife, I'd be dead for sure. I took a deep breath and grabbed his other arm and pulling him towards me. He tried to get away, but I put his head on my shoulder and did something my mother used to do with me to calm me down. I stroked the back of his head and hummed a random tune. He kept struggling to get away, but I wouldn't let him go. I knew what I was doing was crazy, but I felt like it might help. He slowly began to calm in my arms, but I continued to hum and stroke the back of his hair. After a good 5 minutes, he was completely still except for a few times he repositioned himself. I smiled at myself, feeling like I was holding a child. I closed my eyes and suddenly I felt Jeff pull away from my shoulder. I opened my eyes to see him staring at me. I realized my grasp around him and looked away from him. It was strangely quiet, and my heart was still pounding in my chest. It was odd. I wasn't scared. I know I'm not, but something is making me nervous. I heard the rustling of sheets as he shifted it on the hospital bed. I looked up and saw that Jeff had moved to grab his knife. I instinctively gulped as I watched him look at his reflection in the knife. He slipped into his pocket and looked back at me, the crazed look in his eyes gone. I sat back, relaxed, knowing he wasn't going to stab me today. He looked away with his back facing me. So, what was that? I asked after a dawning silence. He remained quiet for a long time before finally letting out a sigh and answering me. It was nothing, he said, and I felt my face twist into a cross look. That wasn't nothing, Jeff, I said. He turned around and looked at me square in the face. Then what do you think it was? He stared looking at me. I sighed and reached to grab his hand. He quickly pulled out of my reach, and an unreadable expression came across his features. Well, I can't tell if you don't tell me what you're experiencing, I replied, trying to get something out of him. He looked away from me, and I awkwardly waited for an answer. After a while, I saw his head look towards the ground, before looking in my general direction. I say this because he was more looking at the bed than me. It's not easy to explain, he said quietly. I smiled and nodded. Take your time. I've got a while, I said, and he looked out the window, a cross look coming across his features, despite the carved smile on his face. When I get these urges to kill. I guess not entirely me. It feels like someone is commanding me to kill these people, but I can never pinpoint where they're coming from. And sometimes it's like it takes me over completely, he said, his voice oddly quiet towards the end. I simply nodded, and he let me grab his hand this time. Jeff, whatever it is, you can rely on me, okay? I said, not sure what was coming out of my mouth. There's this odd desire in me to help him. I guess I'll have to blame it on the social species of human that I am. He didn't answer, only nodding before leaning a head on my shoulder, still looking out the window. Have you ever heard something that you know isn't there? He suddenly asked me, and I thought for a little bit. Yeah, I answered momentarily. But it was something like, I thought my mom called me when she didn't. And I'm sure everyone has had one of those minutes. He nodded slowly and looked out the window. It felt like he was in his whole world at that point. It was sort of obvious too. He looked too dazed to be a reality anyways. Like the one I was seeing. I closed my eyes, leaning back naturally, yawning loudly, as I was drifting into what I hope would be a sweet dream. I felt something brush against my lips. It was soft, whatever it was, but I didn't really note it, especially since I was too tired to know anything. And as I tried to force my eyelids open, I found myself in a peaceful dream that seemed too good to be real. I woke up, a glistening light shining in my face. I pulled an arm over my eyes and looked towards the source, seeing one of the nurses from when I first woke up. She was closing the window that was letting in light. I swear this was closed last night, I heard her mumble before sighing. She latched it closed and looked at the floor. She gasped and quickly ran out of the room. She didn't even bother closing the door behind her, which I've noticed to be unusual in hospitals in this area. I looked where she had been standing, and knew why she was surprised. There was blood dripping down from the windowsill, and bloody footprints on the floor. I was just as shocked, to be honest. I hadn't even realized Jeff was that bloody. Remember last night's events, I looked down at myself and noticed the massive amounts of blood on my sheets. Sad thing is that it isn't mine. It was some innocent person's. My mind finally clicking, I struggled for a moment but finally let out a scream. Something about what I did terrified me. I agreed to help a fucking killer. And now, whoever he killed, his victim's blood was on me. It was terrifying in every possible way. Realizing what I had been thinking, how much blood he had carried with him, it was all too terrifying to justify. A doctor and several nurses rushed into the room trying to get my attention, but my mind was elsewhere, while being nowhere. You could say that I was indeed in shock. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Their voices weren't recognizable. They didn't even seem like voices to me. They seemed like some alien language. When they were finally able to get me out of the bed and into one of the chairs, I was still in shock. I looked down at my hands, seeing them covered in blood. I was terrified, not just about the events, but of myself. Eventually my mom and dad had arrived, pulling me out of my trance. They had the only voices that I could clearly recognize through the crowd of noise. I looked up, knowing that my expression was that of one that was in terror. My mom ran over to me, kneeling in front of me, her hands reached for mine. I pulled them away, scared of her seeing them the way that they were. "Tara, sweetheart, what's wrong?" she asked, and I could tell that she was worried. I shook my head, unsure where my words had gone. They seemed to have disappeared. I was so unsure of what was happening. What had happened last night? If I was the one to murder someone. Even though I knew it wasn't true, it still felt real. "What are you doing?" The doctor yelled, looking towards the doorway. "This is a private room. Get out." I followed his gaze to see a glimpse of Jeff leaving the doorway. I didn't know if it was my imagination or what, but I felt the urge to follow him. I stood up, suddenly watching the doorway, listening for who knows what. "Tara, are you okay?" My mom asked again, standing up. I could hear the distress in her voice. It was obvious, but my mind seemed to not register it. I started walking towards the door, urged to follow what my inner mind hoped to be Jeff. "Tara!" I heard my mom yell, but the second I was in the doorway, I ran. I scanned the halls, trying to look for him among every other white thing in the hallway. As I was running by some room, I was suddenly pulled into one, the door closing behind me. I heard shouts behind the closed door, and I knew it was the nurses that had run after me. I looked behind me, seeing Jeff, and suddenly all my panic escaped me. And like a teenage girl, I found myself hugging him tightly for safety. He seemed as clueless about my actions as I was, but wrapped his arms around me nonetheless. The second I felt his arms around me, I completely relaxed, going limp against him. My arms dropped to my sides and my eyes closed. I feel like I knew what Jeff went through almost, but more psychopathic. Once I was calm, and the yelling from the hall seemed to move somewhere else, his arms left me, and I reluctantly opened my eyes to look at him. He stared at me for a moment, before grabbing my bloodied hands and leading me to an open window in the room. I wasn't sure of what was going to happen, but I followed him anyway, absolutely unsure of where it was going to lead me.